Now that we've learned how to make our hexagons, let's talk about how to join them together. You're going to want to make sure that you have your needle and thread. Make sure your needle is very thin with a small eye. That will help as you're putting these together. Also make sure you have just a single strand of thread and make sure that it is knotted. Take a look at your hexagons and decide how you want to join them together along what edge. I'd like to join these two hexagons along this edge right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place them right sides together, flipping them along that edge. This edge here is where I want them to be joined. So I'm going to take the time to line up that edge very carefully. Make sure they're nice and even and centered. And now I'm ready to sew them together. We're going to use a whip stitch to put these two hexagons together at this side. The first thing you want to do is enter your fabric not right here at the corner, but down on the back side. And the reason for this is because you don't want to see your knot. So I'm going to sew just one stitch from here on the back side, not going through the paper or anything, just the fabric, and up through that very corner of that hexagon so that I end up right on the edge of that side I want to show, or excuse me, the side I want to sew. Let's go ahead and pull that through. Okay. Do make sure that your thread isn't too long. If it's too long, it could get tangled a lot, which could be pretty frustrating. So make sure it's long enough to go across, but not too long to get tangled. You can also use wax to help your thread go smoothly through the fabric. So when you do a whip stitch, you always enter the fabric from the same direction. In this case, we're always going to enter from the bottom, the side with the red hexagon, and we're always going to come out through the top, the side with the black hexagon. So my thread's already coming out the corner here of the red, so I'm going to go and I'm going to do a teeny tiny little stitch. Hold this thread out of the way. I'm going to do a teeny tiny little stitch right here on the corner of the black hexagon. Now can you see how tiny that is? Super, super small. We're only going through maybe a few strands of the fabric. We're not going through the paper, just the very edge of that fabric. Now when I do my next stitch, it's super close to the first one, and I'm going to go up through the fabric on the red hexagon, up through the fabric on the black, and out the top. Pull it nice and snug and do it again. So go down to the red hexagon, do a tiny little stitch, keep your needle going forward, up through the black hexagon, tiny little stitch just along the very edge of that fabric there. Pull it snug, and let's keep going. Do another whip stitch. Do you see how close together these stitches are? The closer together that you keep your stitches and the more snug that you do your stitches, the better it's going to look in the end. So this does require patience. It's not something that's going to be done super fast. This is the kind of sewing that's really nice to do when you're just sitting watching Netflix, or if you're going out to a picnic, or you're stuck in the car and need something to do. It's repetitive, you do a lot of the same thing, but it's simple whip stitches, which is kind of relaxing. So take your time, enjoy the process, just do little tiny stitches through your fabric. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch to the end, and I'll show you how to finish off the row, but keep doing little whip stitches through just a teeny tiny bit of your bottom fabric, teeny tiny bit of the top, and straight on through. Whoops, caught on the corner. Here we go. I'll finish to the end. I've completed my whip stitch to the edge of the hexagon, and now I'm ready to finish it off. When you are ready to finish off the last stitch on your hexagon, go ahead and do your stitch from corner to corner, through the red, through the black. But as you're finishing it off, I like to wrap the thread around my needle twice here, and this will create a little knot, and then I'm going to pull it through. Make sure it doesn't get tangled. And now I have a nice little knot at the edge of my hexagon, and they are sewn together. So when I open it up, you can see that they're now joined. Now, when I did this, I used white thread so that you could see it, but if you were actually sewing this for a project, you'd want to use coordinating thread, so I probably would have chosen black. Now I want to give you an example. So this one, I just made with the white thread, and you can see I did this one as well, but on these here, the stitches are much more visible than on this one. So what was the difference? The difference between the two was the size of my stitches, so making sure I only went through a tiny bit of fabric. It's also pulling it very snug and making sure that your stitches aren't too far apart. So now that you've got two joined, if you were done with this section, you could just go ahead and slip your needle back on through, trim off your knot, and get ready to start again. But what I'm going to do, I want to add another hexagon right now. So rather than cutting my thread off, I'm just going to be prepared to add the next shape. So I want to add another hexagon right here, and so I want to join it along this edge. I also could join it on this edge if I wanted to, so it's your choice which direction you want to go, but it is a good idea to plan ahead. I prefer not to have to cut my thread all the time, so I kind of like to think, where do I want to go next? So I want to join this hexagon to this hexagon along this edge. So I'm going to flip my hexagon over. I'm going to line up these two edges, and my thread's already attached, so I'm ready to go, and I'm going to do a whip stitch to the edge. And so let's start. Same as before, teeny tiny stitches from bottom to top. Now as I'm sewing for the camera, I'm sewing with it vertical like this so that you can all see what I'm doing and you can see my stitches. But if I was actually sewing this as a project just for myself, I would probably sew with my fabric tilted more like this. That way when I did my stitches, the thread would hang down and I wouldn't have to worry about it being caught on all the other shapes. So that's something to consider when you're stitching this. Also, English paper piecing is a really good way to improve your hand sewing skills. If you find that when you are hand stitching, your stitches are too big, they're too loose, or just not very exact, this is a great way to practice them. It just helps get the habit down. You get the repetitive motion of these really small, really exact stitches, and it kind of improves your skills with hand stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish this hexagon to the edge, and then I'll come back. Okay, I finished adding my second hexagon here. So I did my little row of slip stitches, I did my little knot, my thread's still attached, and I'm ready to keep going. So I now have two hexagons connected to my center one. So what I'm going to do next is I am going to create kind of a little flower shape here. I want to add hexagons all the way around the edges. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to come back and I'll show you the next step. Okay, I've done a lot of whip stitching. I connected all of these edges to my centerpiece. You may find that if you do a lot of hexagons at one time, your fingers can get kind of sore. So in between hexagons, it's not a bad idea to give them a little bit of a break, a little bit of exercise. If you play the piano, that'd probably be a good little break. But once you get your pattern, once you get them all joined, you may be wondering, well, how do I do these edges? I can't put them on top of each other. What am I going to do? So I've got my needle still connected. Whoops, there goes my thread. I'll do that. But my thread is still connected here to my hexagon, and I want to sew this edge to this edge. So let me rethread my needle and then I'll show you how we do that. Okay, I've got my needle rethreaded and in my tomato just to be safe. So I need these two hexagons to be on top of each other. So what you can notice is that what's inside here is just paper. You can fold it. You don't want to crinkle it up because that would defeat the purpose of getting this nice shape. But if I want this hexagon and this hexagon to be on top of one another, I can fold this one in half. So very carefully, corner to corner, I'm going to fold that center hexagon. And so now these two hexagons that I wanted to sew are right on top of each other. So I've got my thread still attached right here. I tied a knot after my last one, so I'm ready to keep going. So I'm just going to whip stitch that edge. I'll do that and come back. I finished whip stitching this edge together, and now I'm not going to add any more hexagons to this. I'm finished, so that means there's nowhere else to go after stitching here. So I'm going to hide the end of my thread. I've tied my knot. I'm going to insert my needle through the fabric and out through the center and trim it off so that my thread tail is hidden because I don't want to see that on the front of my project. So now I've got this side all sewn together, and I'm going to repeat this process to sew all the rest of these little interior seams together. And so when you do, you'll have this kind of flower shape. In my next video, I'm going to show you how you can use this flower shape to create a simple project, and so we'll do that next time. But you don't have to connect your hexagons in this pattern. You can create any kind of pattern you like. You can keep going. People make quilts, dresses, blankets, skirts, so many things with these hexagons. Sometimes they even make big pieces of fabric out of hexagons and then cut out other shapes from them to create different projects. I even saw someone who had created the Millennium Falcon out of different shapes. Adding all of these different geometric figures together, you can create wonderful patterns. They don't always have to be hexagons. Different shapes do have different techniques, but the hexagons are a great place to start. So if you'd like to join me in creating my next project, go ahead and create some hexagons like this, one in the center, 6 around the outside, and join each of these centers. I've now joined all my hexagons together. These little edges have all been stitched, and I have the hexagons in the pattern that I'd like. Once you're done with your pattern, you have them all connected, you're ready to use them in a project, whatever that is for you. So you want to give it a good press. Just use your iron to get all of these edges nice and crisp, and once that's done, you can go ahead and remove the paper. Now do be careful with your iron, there is paper inside, so make sure you're cautious. So when it's time to remove the paper, this is when it's really handy if you had put that little hole punch in your template. So you can use a crochet hook, slide it up through the hole, out through the other side, and then pull it on through, and your hexagon pops out nice and easy. If you don't have that, you can just use your fingers, kind of get a grip on it. You can use your crochet hook if you want, get a grip on that, but it's quite a bit more challenging to pull these little guys out without it. But get a grip on it, pull it out. Again, the crochet hooks are really nice. You just slide it all the way up and through, and then pop it out. And then you've got just fabric sewn together in the shape of your preference. Happy sewing!